Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we'll be looking at two articles from AP News about a pretty interesting clash in the tech world.
Oh, yeah. This is a big one.
Apple versus Meta.
With the EU kind of like stepping in as the referee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking about the EU and their push to get Apple to open up their iOS.
Right.
And that could mean big changes for everything from smartwatches to how we share files.
Yeah, and the EU is doing this because they're worried about, you know, big tech companies getting too powerful and stifling any kind of competition.
Right.
So that's where the Digital Markets Act comes in, or DMA. That's their kind of like tool to try and address this.
Right. So the DMA is that's the weapon of choice for the EU in this situation.
Exactly.
But Apple's not really happy about this whole thing, are they?
No, not really. They're arguing that opening up iOS would lead to some serious privacy risks, especially with companies like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp lurking around.
Right.
So it's a bit of a standoff. The EU wants things open. Apple's raising the alarm about privacy, and Meta's basically saying, hey, let us in.
Yeah.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack all of that today. So let's jump right in. So first, can we just talk a little bit about what exactly the EU is pushing for here with this interoperability thing?
Sure. So the EU wants to make sure that all the gadgets and features from other companies work smoothly with iPhones just as well as Apple's own products.
Got it.
We're talking about smartwatches, wireless file transfers, things like that.
So it's about being able to use any brand of smartwatch with my iPhone.
Exactly. And the EU argues that this approach promotes fair competition and prevents companies like Apple from, having total control over the entire ecosystem.
Right.
Which makes sense from their perspective.
Yeah, totally. So what about Apple's side of things? They're making a pretty big deal about the privacy risks here.
Oh, absolutely. Apple's main argument is that opening up iOS would make users more vulnerable to privacy breaches, especially from companies with a less than stellar record on data practices.
Okay.
And they really single out Meta here, painting a pretty dramatic picture of the potential consequences.
So what are they saying could actually happen? What does this nightmare scenario look like?
Well, they're saying, imagine Meta having access to all your messages, your emails, your phone calls, even your passwords.
Oh, okay.
They're saying that Meta could see everything you do on your phone, what apps you use, the photos you take, your files, calendar events, basically everything.
Wow.
It's a scary thought, right? And Apple argues that their closed system is actually better at protecting user data because they have more control over everything.
So it's like a trade-off?
Yeah.
More openness might mean more convenience and choices,
Yeah.
but it could also mean less privacy.
Exactly.
But Meta's not just going to sit there and take this, are they?
Oh, of course not. They're pushing back hard. They're saying that Apple is just using privacy as an excuse to stifle competition.
Right.
They're accusing Apple of being anti-interoperability, and they argue that their own data practices are actually in line with EU regulations.
Okay, so Meta's basically saying, trust us, we're good guys.
Pretty much. And they're also suggesting that Apple just wants to keep its ecosystem closed so they can stay on top and limit consumer choices.
So it's like a power struggle.
Totally. It's all about who has the control.
Okay, so we've got these two sides, each with their own arguments.
Yeah.
And then we have the EU trying to figure out what to do.
Right. And they're not just talking, they're taking action. They're actually launching 2 investigations into Apple's practices.
Okay, what kind of investigations?
These are called specification proceedings, and they're basically designed to figure out exactly what Apple needs to do to comply with the DMA.
The Digital Markets Act, right?
Yeah. One of these investigations is going to focus on how other devices can interact with iOS.
Okay,
So things like smartwatches.
got it.
And the other one is going to look at how Apple handles requests from software developers who want their apps to work smoothly with Apple's systems.
Okay, so this is getting serious.
Absolutely. The EU is serious about enforcing this DMA, and Apple's going to have to figure out how to respond.
Yeah. This whole thing seems like it has some pretty big implications, not just for Apple and Meta, but for all of us as users.
It does, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it could change how we use our devices, what apps we have access to, and even how much control we have over our own data.
Wow. Okay, so the stakes are high.
Definitely.
And how long is this whole process going to take?
Well, these investigations are going to take a few months at least.
Okay.
And then once the EU has its findings, they'll present them to Apple, and Apple will have to decide whether to comply or potentially face some big fines.
Wow.
So this isn't over yet by a long shot.
Okay, well, this is all a lot to digest, but it
Yeah.
sounds like we're just getting started.
Exactly.
So before we dive deeper into the specifics, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, techcoffeehouse.com.
A great place to get all your tech news and insights.
They're the ones keeping us fueled with our daily dose of tech knowledge brewed fresh.
Absolutely. They're a must-read for anyone who wants to stay ahead of the curve in the tech world.
All right, so we'll be back in a moment to unpack all of this, and more so, stay tuned.
This is going to be good. When we talk about these privacy risks, it's easy to kind of dismiss it as like, just fear-mongering. But Apple is actually pointing to some pretty specific ways that opening up iOS could make users more vulnerable.
Right, it's not just like a general feeling of, oh, bad things might happen. They're talking about actual mechanisms by which a company like Meta could exploit a more open system.
Exactly. And I think that's important to understand because it's not just about Meta being evil or having bad intentions.
Right, it's about the system itself and how it could be exploited.
Right. It's like if you leave a door unlocked, someone might walk in even if they weren't planning on breaking in.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Mhm.
So what are some of the specific things that Apple is worried about?
Well, one concern is that if third-party apps have more access to core iOS functions, there's a higher chance of them accidentally exposing user data.
Even if they're not trying to.
Exactly. It could be unintentional, like a bug in their code or something.
So it's not about malice, it's about the potential for mistakes.
Right. And mistakes can happen, especially when you have a more complex and interconnected system.
Right, more moving parts, more chances for something to go wrong.
Exactly. And another concern is that opening up certain iOS features could make it harder for Apple to enforce their privacy guidelines.
Oh, I see. Because right now they have a lot of control over what data apps can collect and how they can use it.
Exactly. But if they're forced to open up those features to third-party developers, they might lose some of that control.
So it's a trade-off. More openness could mean more innovation, but it could also mean less privacy.
Right. And that's the heart of the debate. How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, tough question. But Meta says you can have both open access and strong privacy protections.
They do. And to be fair, it's not impossible.
So are they just blowing smoke, or is there some truth to what they're saying?
Well, there are definitely ways to design systems that allow for interoperability while still protecting user data.
Like what?
You could have strict data encryption protocols, clear consent mechanisms, and strong auditing systems to make sure that companies are following the rules.
So it's not an all-or-nothing situation.
Right. There are shades of gray. It's about finding the right balance.
Okay, but here's the thing that keeps nagging at me. Meta doesn't exactly have a great track record when it comes to data privacy.
Yeah, that's the big question mark hanging over all of this.
They've had so many scandals and controversies over the years, Cambridge Analytica data breaches, all sorts of stuff.
Right. It's hard to forget all of that.
So it's tough to take them at their word when they say they're going to be responsible with our data.
Yeah, it's understandable why people are skeptical.
It's like trusting a fox to guard the henhouse.
And that's why the EU's investigation is so important. They need to really dig into Meta's claims and make sure that any move toward interoperability doesn't just give them a free pass to collect even more data.
Exactly. They need to be the watchdog here, making sure that users are protected.
Right, because ultimately it's about our data and our privacy.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the potential benefits of interoperability.
Okay. Assuming that the privacy concerns can be addressed.
Right. Let's say for the sake of argument that we can figure out a way to open up iOS without compromising user privacy.
Sure.
What are some of the good things that could come out of that?
Well, one area where we could see some real innovation is in accessibility.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Imagine if developers could create apps that work seamlessly with iOS features like voice control and assistive touch.
Right.
That could be huge for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really important point.
It's not just about gadgets and convenience, it's about making technology more inclusive.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So accessibility is one big potential benefit.
What else? Healthcare is another area where we could see some major improvements.
Okay, how so?
Imagine if you could easily share your health data from your iPhone with your doctor, no matter what system they're using.
Right, that would be so much easier than the current situation.
Exactly. Or imagine being able to use third-party apps to monitor your vital signs and get personalized health insights.
So an open iOS could lead to better healthcare outcomes.
Potentially, yes. It could make it easier for developers to create innovative health apps and services.
Okay, so we're talking about some potentially life-changing applications here, not just about being able to use the different brand of smartwatch.
Right. This is about things that could really make a difference in people's lives.
But let's be realistic. Even if we can solve the privacy issues, there are still going to be challenges with a more open iOS.
Oh, of course. There's no such thing as a perfect solution.
So what are some of the potential downsides?
Well, one challenge is that an open iOS could lead to a more fragmented user experience.
How so?
Right now, Apple has a lot of control over the look and feel of iOS, which is part of why people like it so much.
Right, it's very consistent and user-friendly.
Exactly. But if they open it up to third-party developers, there's a risk that the user experience could become less consistent and more confusing.
So it's a trade-off, control versus flexibility.
Right. More freedom for developers could lead to more innovation, but it could also mean a less polished experience for users.
Like choosing between a well-curated art gallery and a bustling street market.
Exactly. Both have their appeal, but they offer very different experiences.
Okay, so we've talked about some potential benefits and challenges. Now I want to hear from you, the listener. What do you think about all of this?
Are you excited about the prospect of a more open iPhone ecosystem?
Or are you worried about the privacy implications?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But by understanding the different perspectives and having these conversations, we can hopefully navigate this evolving tech landscape in a way that benefits everyone.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between openness, innovation, and privacy.
And that's something we all need to be thinking about. So,
Mhm.
while we've been talking about this, I keep thinking about like the bigger picture. What happens if the EU actually wins this thing and forces Apple to open up iOS? Could this like set a precedent for other companies too,
Yeah.
like Google or Amazon?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The EU has made it pretty clear that they want to make the digital world more fair and competitive.
Right.
And they're not just focused on Apple. They've also got Google and Meta in their sights with investigations and regulations.
So this isn't just about iPhones and iOS, it's about the whole digital landscape.
Exactly.
Wow.
If the EU can make Apple open up, it could give them the momentum to go after other tech giants too. The ones who have built those walled gardens around their products.
Right.
And that could change everything.
Yeah, like how so?
I mean, imagine a world where your Android phone works perfectly with your Amazon Echo and your Google Nest Hub and your Apple Watch all at the same time. No compatibility issues whatsoever.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But let's be real here. These companies aren't just going to give up without a fight.
Oh, absolutely not. They've got tons of lawyers and lobbyists, and they're not afraid to use them.
Right.
This is going to be a long and difficult battle.
Yeah, it's like a high-stakes chess game with the future of the internet hanging in the balance.
Exactly. And it's impossible to predict who will win.
Yeah. And it's not just about the tech companies and the regulators either. We as consumers have a role to play too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The more we demand things like interoperability and privacy and fair competition, the more pressure these companies will feel to change.
So it's not enough to just sit back and watch.
Mm.
We need to be active and make our voices heard.
Absolutely. Support organizations that share your values, choose products and services that reflect your priorities. Every little choice we make sends a message.
Right. Okay, well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension.
I know what you mean.
On one hand, it's really exciting to think about a future where technology is more open and accessible and everything just works together seamlessly.
The possibilities are endless. But
Yeah.
yeah, we also have to be careful and make sure we don't lose sight of things like privacy and security in the process.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
And it's going to require all of us to be vigilant and to speak up for what we believe in.
Well said. So we hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about and maybe even inspired you to become a more informed and active participant in the digital world.
We all have a part to play in shaping the future of technology.
Absolutely. And as always, a big thank you to techcoffeehouse.com for supporting this episode and keeping us caffeinated with their insightful tech analysis.
They're the best.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.